wish to stop.
General Howe was asked to help. Howe completely abandoned the plan and gone for all-out personal glory by capturing the American capital, Philadelphia. He defeated Washington and his army at Brandywine Creek by using the old hit him with a decoy and flank him from behind tactic, and Philadelphia was now in British hands, forcing Congress to escape to York. Burgoyne was left on his own to face the ever-increasing American force in Saratoga. Horatio Gates teamed up with Benedict Arnold to deal one final blow to Burgoyne's army. Of course, there was more arguing on who should do what. At the Battle of Bemis Heights, Arnold charged at the British, and obliterated them. And once again was completely sidelined and forgotten. With the victory at Saratoga, the French were finally ready to join the Americans. They would provide military troops to fight in both fronts in the Caribbean, India, and in North America. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben was hired by Benjamin Franklin to give the colonists troops really European military training. They learned how to shoot accurately, how to march in formation, where to poop and where not to, and strict punishments were handed out to any who didn't comply. Washington's army came out of the winter in 1778 a new and improved force, ready to take Philadelphia back from the British. In the end though, they didn't have to. With the French entry into the war, the British ordered General Clinton to evacuate Philadelphia, and consolidate all of the British forces in New York. So Washington sent Benedict Arnold to reoccupy and secure the city, as he pursued the British through New Jersey on land, eventually finding a good opportunity to attack at Monmouth Courthouse. The battle took place on a sweltering hot summer's day, and as many soldiers died from heat stroke as they did from battle. In the end, after some incompetent/borderline treason from Washington's second-in-command, it was a draw, and in this war a draw is kind of a victory for the Americans. Now it's time to look at this guy named John Paul Jones. This guy sailed to the British Isles, somehow captured a British ship off the coast of Ireland, and brought it back to France. Then he returned, attacking more ships, raiding towns, and evading capture the entire time. This is literal pirate warfare. In one incident, he captured a British ship and returned to a Dutch port without an official ensign, because his was lost during the battle. That's a big no-no, and can have you arrested as a pirate. The Dutch helped him out by quickly creating a design based on Benjamin Franklin's description of what the American flag should look like, and they entered it into their records as an official American flag. What the Continental Navy was lacking resources, though, the French entry into the war made up for. The French began with naval skirmishes in the English Channel, and they sent a large fleet to America, although it sustained a lot of damage in a storm off Rhode Island. Now let's go to Lieutenant Colonel George Rodgers Clark. George Rodgers Clark was an American military officer whose successful campaigns in the Illinois country helped secure the Northwest Territory for the United States during the American Revolutionary War. The Battle of Vincenness took place in February 1779 during the American Revolutionary War. At the time, the British had regained control of Fort Sackville in Vincenness, an important settlement in what is now Indiana, under the command of Henry Hamilton. Rather than wait for spring, George Rodgers Clark led about 170 men on a daring winter march of roughly 180 miles through freezing temperatures, flooded plains, and waist-deep water. The difficult journey surprised the British, who did not expect an attack during the winter. When Clark's force reached Vincenness, they surrounded the fort and used careful positioning and accurate rifle fire to convince the British they faced a much larger army. After about 2 days of fighting and negotiations, Hamilton surrendered Fort Sackville on February 25, 1779. The victory was significant because it restored American control over the Illinois country, weakened British influence in the Northwest, and strengthened the United States' claim to the Northwest Territory. Clark's success became one of the most celebrated frontier campaigns of the Revolutionary War. The Americans were hoping for a bigger commitment from the French, so John Adams went to France to help Benjamin Franklin continue negotiations. The Dutch would provide aid, although they never formed an official alliance. More significantly though, the Spanish, who had already been providing aid officially, joined the war in June 1779. They would provide support in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast, campaigns that heavily impacted the Native American tribes in those areas. Both sides enlisted the help of Native American tribes throughout the war, sometimes even pitting those tribes against each other. In the summer of 1779, after a series of raids against the Americans by the Iroquois, Washington organized an expedition that burned down more than 40 villages, forcing the tribes to relocate to Canada for British protection. It also important to method African Americans, both free and enslaved, joined both sides of the war to gain rights. Afterwards, many were simply returned to slavery, particularly those who had fought for the Americans. Despite owning slaves himself, Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of offending the Southern colonies, this was removed from the final draft. For the same reason, the American Army stopped enlisting African American men in 1775, a policy that Washington, a slave owner himself, supported. With this in mind, they still face heavy discrimination in their new lives outside of America. Benedict Arnold was now in charge of Philadelphia and enjoyed an active social life, even marrying into the city's elite. Ironically, this was the same elite that had socialized with the British during their occupation of the city. As a result, many Philadelphians, including the state governor, began accusing Arnold of harboring pro-British sympathies. To keep the people happy, Washington wrote a letter rebuking Arnold, calling his conduct imprudent and improper, and that was too many ouchies for Benedict Arnold to handle. He asked Washington to put him in charge of the fort at West Point, then he contacted the British, offering to hand the plans of the fort over to them and join their side. The treasonous plans were discovered on a captured British officer, but Arnold managed to escape before he was arrested. As a British brigadier general, he would go on to lead raids against American cities, most notably his raid of Richmond, Virginia in 1781. His betrayal shook George Washington, who had once again set up camp at Morristown. His leadership somehow held the Continental Army together through the harshest winter of the war. We're entering 1780, and Parliament was hopping mad that the war still wasn't over. Debt was very high and the North was in a stalemate. The British decided to make a major shift in strategy to the south, an economically rich area they thought had a high level of support for the British. A year earlier, they had captured the under-defended city of Savannah, Georgia easily, and a joint American-French counter-siege failed. Now, they laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina. It fell within months, with thousands of American troops surrendering to the British, a costly defeat. Sir Bannister Tarleton was sent to hunt down rebels and destroyed them. Horatio Gates was then sent to fight in the Battle of Trenton. The rout was a personally humiliating defeat for Gates, the American general best known for commanding the Patriot forces at the British defeat at Saratoga 3 years previously. Now we get to the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Nathanael Greene knew the British outnumbered his own forces, and wouldn't be defeated with conventional tactics. So he had to think outside the box. He split his army into two, then they went running in two different directions. Cornwallis sent Tarleton after Morgan, and he caught up with him at Cowpens, where Morgan proceeded to kick Tarleton's butt. At the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, the two sides engaged in vicious close combat. Cornwallis, fearing loss, fired his big guns into the chaotic fighting, cutting down many of his own men. Greene retreated, giving Cornwallis the victory, but Cornwallis lost a quarter of his men in the fighting. So it felt much more like a British defeat. At this point, both sides desperately needed something to happen soon to end the fighting. The British were running out of money, while the Americans were again facing mutinies, as the men went without pay or even basic living needs. Fortunately, the French were now showing up in greater numbers and were ready to fight. After his encounter with Greene, Cornwallis decided the only way to win the South was to first prevent the Southern Continental Army from using Virginia as a supply base, so he abandoned the Carolinas, moving to Wilmington, and on to Yorktown, a position the British believed would be easy to supply and support. On his march to Yorktown, he raided many farms, stealing horses and supplies from the locals, but also freeing thousands of slaves, many of whom joined him. The French saw Cornwallis' new position as an opportunity to land a decisive blow on the British. Washington wanted to attack Clinton in New York, but the French said it was a really dumb, and it was. Instead, Washington sent out fake dispatches to make it look like they would attack Clinton, but secretly their combined force marched all the way down to Virginia. A large French fleet under the command of Comte de Grasse arrived and successfully cleared the British Navy out of the Chesapeake Bay. The combined land and naval forces then laid siege to Cornwallis' army in Yorktown. The American and French forces tightened in around the city, raining artillery down on Cornwallis, who desperately appealed to Clinton for aid, but Clinton unusually didn't care about the whole thing. Cornwallis held out for nearly a month before he had no choice but to surrender. With 7,000 British troops being captured, the British gave up. The war was pointless and Britain couldn't afford it any longer. The British still held New York, Charleston, and Savannah, but fighting between the two sides mostly ceased as peace negotiations opened up in Paris. On September 3, 1783, the British signed a Treaty of Paris. The British removed its troops from American soil, recognized American independence and even ceded territory up to the Mississippi River. In return, the Americans agreed to pay any debts still owed to Britain, and gave a fair treatment to any colonists who remained loyal to the crown. France gained absolutely nothing from the war and gained an even more devastating economic crisis. This would lead to their own revolution that overthrew their monarchy a few decades later. Spain regained Florida back during the negotiation. Washington then retired to his home in Mount Vernon, wishing his men's photo by saying, "I most the valve wish that your latter day may be as prosperous and happy as your formal ones of inglorious and honorable." When he went into retirement, though, literally everyone in the country wanted him to become the new leader of the country. He eventually complied and went into office. He was sworn in on April 30, 1789, and he himself established many of the standards and limitations of what the American leader should be. President. He set up a cabinet of expert advisors, knowing that no president could know everything, no matter how smart or genius they claimed to be. He proposed major legislation to Congress, and gave an annual State of the Union address to keep his own power in check. He also stated that the United States should remain neutral in foreign conflicts. Yeah, scrap that one. He voluntarily gave up his power after just 2 terms. He could have made it anything he wanted, but he made it 2 4-year terms. This would set the stage for the eventual United States we know today.